What is up, everybody? Raymond Summerlin back on your podcast feed. It's Thursday. It's 11:30. That means we're on YouTube. We are recording live, talking about the week to come for fantasy. And there's only one person I want to talk about, or talk to for the week to come in fantasy. A man who crushed last week, absolutely crushed last week. Rich, are you the smartest man alive? People are saying that Rich Hribar, the Swami of Konami, is the smartest man alive. How you doing, Rich?
Listen. I'll let my wife know that you said that. See what she thinks about it.
Yeah, I'm sure she's gonna take my word for it. Like,
No, listen,
but
it
yeah,
was
no, it was a
good.
great
It was a
week.
good.
It
It
was a
was a
great week for you, right?
Yeah, good week. I think it was a good week for a lot of people. It was a good week of football,
Yeah,
right? Like we
yes.
talked about last week on the show how slow week one was. Whether it was you want to blame the defensive meta, no preseason, whatever you want to do. It was a gross week one, but we bounced back. We had a lot of high scoring games, and when the games are high scoring, that means guys are scoring fantasy points.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was for a lot of it, it was the guys we wanted to be scoring fantasy points who were scoring fantasy points. So yeah, it was a good week for the entire Sharp football crew on the DFS streets. I can't wait to be absolutely crushed this week because low key the games this week they're not they're not great, Rich. They're not filling me with a lot of joy.
Yeah, on the main slate, especially for DFS purposes, we've got a lot of like one-sided totals. This is for the 2 weeks we've been doing the season here, and writing up these matchups. We've got three double-digit point spreads, which is the most we've had so far.
Yeah, it's not great. In fact, we're going to talk about one of those games just because we're going to talk about the Chiefs and Bears. Even though it is so one-sided, you had a ton about Justin Fields in the worksheet. And so I really want to talk about kind of that in the Chiefs defense, which might be getting slept on. So we've got a lot coming up. We found some interesting things to talk about for sure this week. But before we get into any of that, let's talk a little bit about Cam Akers, who on late on Wednesday night, it was announced that his saga, his running lifetime movie with Sean McVay has finally reached its conclusion. He was traded to the Vikings for essentially nothing, right? Was it like a 2026 conditional seventh?
Yeah,
Was that what it was? That is
2026. That would be Kyle Shanahan would ask if we'll even be here.
yeah, no, that's in present value, that is worth literally zero. And so he was traded to the Vikings. It's an interesting situation because I know both you and I, and we were not special in this regard. A lot of people were out on Alexander Madison as a fantasy asset coming into the season. And the reason was we did not expect him to last the season as the starter. We kind of thought that it would come from within. I have a lot of best ball teams with Ty Chandler on them. It's looking rough. Still free Ty Chandler. We still have hope. We'll see what Cam Akers is able to do. But we thought that he was going to get company, whether it be from within, whether it be a veteran addition, or I guess whether it be by trade. Now Cam Akers is there. And so I guess the question is, how are you viewing this situation? How quickly is this transition happening? Are either of these guys going to be worthy of putting in fantasy lineups anytime soon?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, I still think Minnesota wants Alexander Madison to be a thing, obviously, with the contract they gave him, whether that comes to fruition. So it could just be, adding a guy that has familiar with the system. Because remember, they did look at Kareem Hunt in the preseason, too. So we knew that they were sniffing around adding guys. They signed Miles Gaskin after, like, he was released. So we knew that they were kicking around adding to this backfield after they released Dwayne McBride. So I don't know if it's like a full run out to where it's like the end of Alexander Madison either. They could just want something with him. But, I mean, we have a running multi-year sample, though, of Alexander Madison like not being an efficient runner of the football. We started the season that regard. So it's just really hard to kind of bank on him, just magically turning it on as well. So it opens the door if a player is not being efficient and a team has not been able to use him in the capacity to help their offense. Because listen, the Vikings, 91% of their yardage gained has come via passing, which is an absurd number through 2 games. It's the highest rate in the NFL. Like, they clearly want to try to run the football better than they have. Can they do it with any of these guys remains to be seen. But it's just a situation we're going to have to wait and kind of like see play out. I do think that this weekend, he will still be the crux carrier of the football for this offense.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, this matchup the Chargers have been better against the run, but we'll see how this matchup works out. And I'm glad you brought up the running game because the passing game has been working for the Vikings. That has been good. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well because that's one of the few high total, very interesting games for this weekend. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned we have a long track record here of Alexander Mattison just not being efficient. These aren't new stats. We talked about them in the preseason. He's averaged 3.3 yards per carry this year. He has 0 carries of more than 10 yards. He only has had 0.89 yards before contact per attempt. But at this point, that's a running problem for years as well. So it's fair to question that stat has a lot to do with the running back as well as the offensive line. That's a shared stat. And so it's fair to wonder, you know, how much of that is on Madison. And then this year you look at the stats and it's the same thing. I mean, you look at the last 3 seasons, same thing. 3.7 yards per carry, 8.4% of his carries, 10 or more yards, 21.1% 0 or negative yards. This kind of just who Alexander Mattison has been. Will Cam Akers be better? I don't know. Like, I don't know. I thought that the Lifetime movie with Cam Akers and Sean McVay should have been called 3 Yards at a Time, the Cam Akers story, and we might be doing that here in Minnesota. So I'm just free Ty Chandler. That's what I'm thinking. Please,
I
please,
mean,
Rich, free Ty
free
Chandler.
Jordan Addison is the real thing we should care about.
Exactly. Jordan Addison's route rate is something we'll talk about later. It's getting better. It's going up. And Osborne, he caught his touchdown, but he dropped like 3 passes in that game. Bad drops too. So maybe we'll see it. Before we dive into today's episode, I did want to remind you that you can get Rich's worksheet, all of our fantasy content, his rankings, waiver wire on Tuesday from Curtis Hurst. You can get all of that as part of our all access package. Use code ANGLES for 15% off the fantasy package, the all access package, any package over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Also, I have to say, our props package is doing amazing. 13-5 last week. So check that out. Check the podcast description, code angles, sharpfootballanalysis.com to get that. By the way, that code is available as well in the YouTube description, which reminds me, if you're not watching this live on Thursday morning at 11:30 Eastern, you can. If you go over to YouTube, search Warren Sharp, you'll find our channel, subscribe to it. It'll tell you when we're live. Rich and I will be here every single Thursday morning to talk about the week to come for fantasy. But before we start talking about the week to come, we want to talk about the week that was and some of the more interesting kind of situations coming out of week 2. And I think the most important fantasy situation, which is the least exciting fantasy situation because of what we saw happen to Nick Chubb on Monday night. I have to be honest with you, Rich, like that injury depressed me. I
Yeah.
love Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is so fun to watch. He's maybe the best running back in the league, certainly one of the best running backs in the league. What he's able to do, what he's able to do every single year so far of his career, like I just felt like I was in a malaise the rest of Monday night. I didn't get work done that I should have gotten done after that injury. It was just terrible.
Yeah. Our buddy at the site, Ryan McChrystal, has been he's made a living off of just Nick Chubb's like longest rush prop for like the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So pour one out. And Ryan doubled down as a Browns fan. So like double whammy. But as a football fan, like you saw the response of the injury, right? Like you saw the tweets from players across the league. And that's all you need to know about like how Nick Chubb is regarded, you know. And it's gonna be an interesting dynamic because obviously, you remove Nick Chubb from this offense. It still is going to probably be a good running game, at least an above average running game, but like it's probably going to have a step back because you remove a guy like Nick Chubb and just how hyper efficient he has been. I mean, he's the only player in NFL history to average over 5 yards per carry and 100 more rushes to start his career for 4 straight seasons. So even if we think Jerome Ford, and he's a player I liked coming out of college, is going to be good still, he's not going to be Nick Chubb. And that just puts more emphasis on the Browns needing Deshaun Watson to figure out how to play football again. Because you look at Deshaun Watson and you know, we can do this thing, but we're just keep kicking the can on it. He played week 1 in the rain against the Bengals. Yep. The Steelers defense is good. But we just keep kicking the can on. He just looks like he doesn't have a feel for playing football like right now. It doesn't look like he is comfortable at all in this offense. And it's not just a 2-game thing. It's a 7-game thing going back in the last year. So the Browns now, with losing Nick Chubb, it just puts more emphasis on needing more out of Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're going to get it. I mean, it hasn't been good. He's at 18.8% off target rate. It is 10.5 air yards per attempt so far this season. He is pushing it downfield. What I will say is that it's not great when he targets Amari Cooper, but it has been much better when he targets Amari Cooper than it has been with Elijah Moore, or I would say Donovan Peoples-Jones, but he doesn't target Donovan Peoples-Jones. Donovan Peoples-Jones has a target on something like 9% of his routes so far this year. So he just doesn't get targets. But it has been better with Cooper. Maybe there's a receiver situation. But you're right. He's just going to have to be better. This team has the talent. The defense is playing amazing. This team should be competing for a playoff spot and winning games in the playoffs.
They should be 2
Whether
and
they're
0.
able
I
to do
mean,
that.
you lose a
Yeah,
game where
absolutely.
your opponent doesn't even run a play in the red zone. You give them 14 points in a division game at that. So like it's going to be that's one that we look back in week 18 and that's like where the Browns season was decided.
Yeah, it was just a terrible loss. And again, like you get a little bit like, okay, they lost Nick Chubb with some of that involved, but we can't keep making excuses for what we've seen from Watson since he came back. It hasn't been great. On the running back side, I do want to say I am a little bit worried about what we're going to see from Ford. He had the long run, but outside of that long run, he had 15 carries for 37 yards. He only had a 0.13 yards before contact per rush compared to 2.04 for Chubb behind the same line. That's a very small sample. But like I said about Alexander. Sorry, producer Heather hit us with the real or fake. The real or fake. That's a great picture of you, Rich. I didn't know that there were pictures of you on that picture of you, the Konami picture. I hadn't seen that one in a while.
Yeah, that's the one that everyone uses for every thumbnail.
That is great. That is wonderful. So yeah, real or fake? Are we talking about Jerome Ford? Is it real or fake? And then the other thing with Jerome Ford is that now they have Kareem Hunt there, and the Browns chose Ford over Hunt. That gives him some advantage. They've said he's still going to be the lead back, but I mean, Hunt was involved with Nick Chubb. I can't imagine he's not going to be involved with Jerome Ford. Hunt had 12 goal to go touches to 17 for Chubb last season. That's a real concern for Ford's fantasy value, especially if he's not being as efficient as Nick Chubb with his carries, which you wouldn't expect him to be. Nick Chubb is one of the best running backs we've seen. And so there are a lot of red flags. If I'm trying to decide, is this real with Ford? Are we going to consistently get, startable production out of him? There are some red flags going into week 3.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the biggest thing for Ford, I think, is just this opening runway he has of the games the Browns play. You face the Titans this week. Then you face the Baltimore Ravens, who have been great against the run starting this year and going back to last year. Then you have a week 5 bye week. Then you come out of that bye and you face the 49ers. And then you go against the Colts, who have been great against the run to start the year. So, like, none of the matchups are very good either here. And if you just are inefficient in tough matchups, it just leaves the doorway cracked open for the Browns to try to alter something that isn't working as good as they believe it should be working. So it's going to be something to kind of like keep an eye on here, how efficient he is against these tough opponents. I expect Kareem Hunt to be in like a similar role that he was in to close last season. I expect Jerome Ford to be in the role Nick Chubb was in at a lesser degree of efficiency than Nick Chubb could produce. And Kareem Hunt was basically phased out as the season went on. This is the reason why we were on Nick Chubb so heavily this year, was that he had his highest share of team touches. Kareem Hunt was so ineffective last year, and the Browns realized it midway through the year and just kind of pulled the plug on it. I mean, he failed to gain yardage on 22% of his carries. He had one of the highest light box rates in the NFL and still wasn't productive. He wasn't good in the pass game either. 6 yards per catch, 4.8 yards per target. So I think he's going to be a long down and distance guy early on. We'll see how much the Browns trust Jerome Ford in pass protection. But just the schedule leaves enough open too, where you're not going to be confident really playing him. It's the third week in a row, like the DFS chalk, like punt down running back plays facing the Titans. We'll see if third time's the charm for people, but I probably won't be testing it out again for the third week in a row.
No, I'm good. Yeah, no, I stayed away from Kelly last week, and I'm going to keep doing that to any running back playing the Titans because that is real. That is not something we have to worry about. Is it real or fake? That is real for sure. Moving on, one of the things we talked about a lot in the preseason was Kenneth Walker's workload after the Seahawks spent a second round pick on Zach Charbonnet and what we were going to see from him. Was he going to get the same workload? And so far through 2 weeks, he's been getting the workload. He has been the clear running back one. He has 34 of 47 backfield touches so far. He's run 31 of 55 running back routes. That is something I don't think we expected. He did give up a few more third down routes to DJ Dallas last week, but it wasn't even Zach Charbonnet that was taking them from him. So I guess, moving forward, now they have a good matchup this week. They're home favorites, a game we expect them to win. This looks like a great spot for Kenneth Walker. Are you trusting this workload moving forward, or is this just getting Zach Charbonnet, I guess, into the mix a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's so early in the season with some of these rookie running backs, and a lot of rookie running backs are typically slow burns, especially one that you think a coach is going to trust on passing downs, right? Like this is a tried and true thing when you follow running backs throughout like the course of time. Coaches do not trust them in pass protection, right? And we're going to find that out with Jahmyr Gibbs again this weekend because he came in after David Montgomery was injured and had one rep and pass protection and got absolutely bulldozed and gave up a pressure on it. So
it's Craig Williams season. I mean, Craig Reynolds season.
Yeah, the
Craig
NBC,
Reynolds season for
Craig
sure.
Reynolds. But we're going to see some things like that because you're going to look at the Saints too. Kendre Miller's going to be up this week. And, you can maybe say like, all right, well, this is a spot where they might want to use some explosiveness, but are they going to trust Tony Jones in pass protection, right? And I think that's what we have with Zach Charbonnet, right? Like it just takes a while for these guys to earn this type of role in the coaching staff's minds. We've seen it over the course of time, over and over with these running backs. So I think that's what we're looking at. That's why DJ Dallas is kind of in the mix. But yeah, Kenneth Walker is kind of in like the same kind of role he had last year to close the season. And it's just real positive. I mean, we're seeing it with everyone was talking about, Tank Bigsby and what he was going to do. And same thing is happening over there in Jacksonville.
I actually picked up Dearness Johnson in our longtime, very deep dynasty leagues because, I mean, are we going to see is Tank Bigsby even the running back 2 in Jacksonville anymore? It's something that will be interesting to watch moving forward. And you mentioned it's Walker's in the same role he's in. He's playing the same way that he played last year. It's still very boomer bust.
That's who he is.
27.6% of his runs have been negative. Yeah, exactly. It is who he is, but he has a better success rate than anybody else in that backfield. He's really given them, because we know who Kenneth Walker is, he's really given them no reason to take his work away. And so the fact that even, if you think Charbonnet comes in and does what DJ Dallas did in week 2, Walker was still there on third downs, getting the routes, still ran more routes because he's the lead back, still ran more routes than Dallas overall. I'm thinking this is real. I think we may have overreacted in the preseason. I don't know, I don't know if we're going to see like massive fantasy games from him because of that offensive line, because of just his running style. Not massive. I don't know if we're going to see like super consistent production. Mm-hmm. He did get the 2 touchdowns last week, but it wasn't like he was efficient.
He's still largely going to have to be a guy that goes as his touchdowns go.
Yeah, I think so as well. Like, I think that's still what we're looking at. So, he's probably maybe not even going to finish much higher than what his draft slot was, just because he got so elevated by everybody else being hurt ahead of him. But I think that this has been a great sign, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this. Another great sign, and I actually tweeted about this earlier this week. CJ Stroud has played really, really well, and I don't think their record shows it. And I don't think maybe if you look at their overall stats, I don't think that shows it. But one of the reasons is their offensive line is absolutely destroying Stroud. Like, he's under pressure a lot. But even in that scenario, even in that environment, even with the running game doing nothing, CJ Stroud has been productive, has been solid, and he's been especially solid when kept clean. He's supporting Nico Collins as a viable fantasy option as the number 1. He's supporting Robert Woods as a viable PPR option. Everything through 2 weeks has looked pretty good. Is this real? Can we trust the Texans passing game to continue bringing us some fantasy value?
For the short term, I think so. As long as they keep trailing in these games and have to chase points, because I mean he's got 104 dropbacks through 2 weeks. That also helps everything. Because the first week he only averaged 5.5 yards per pass attempt, but if you're going to get that many pass attempts, you're going to bleed production out in PPR to your wide receivers. And then last week he had a really great game in terms of like counting stats and efficiency, but also against the team I think we are going to target weekly in the Colts. Like, not
Throw
for
against
just
the Colts. Yes.
yeah,
Yep.
again, like, so I want to see how he plays again, this week. But Stroud hasn't done anything to waver me from being the QB1 in this class. He was my QB1 through 2 weeks. And that's no real shade to Bryce Young. I think Bryce Young's in a situation that's not very good to nurture a quarterback right now. But CJ Stroud just was the part in college. And the one kind of bugaboo that people kept trying to tear down CJ Stroud was like when he has to play off script or when he's under pressure, can he produce? And that has been the case so far through 2 weeks. So he's actually tore that down as well. So, I mean, I'm just going to continue to believe that he was the QB1 in this class and stick with it. We don't really know what we have with Bobby Slowick either in this offense, big picture. There's going to be play reduction along the way, but on the road this week as 10-point underdogs, probably going to be a lot of pass volume here again, which means we can kind of go back to the well on these guys, the Nico Collinses, and then you can have some fringe PPR floor stuff with the Tank Dells and the Robert Woods of the world.
I think your point about play volume is a really good one. They're 15th in pace in the first half. They're second in pace in the second half. He leads the league with 65 second half dropbacks. He has 39 in the first half. If they are able to, stick around in games a little bit more, then I would suspect his volume is going to fall, and that is going to affect everybody in this passing game will be affected by that, especially as you mentioned, Robert Woods, and then I think Tank Dell as well. Although Dell, has some playmaking upside for sure. But I think like I just keep coming back to Laramie Tunsil's coming back this week. You
Mm-hmm.
would expect the offensive line to get healthier. I believe two of the people they put on injured reserve from the offensive line are eligible to come back in week 5. We'll kind of see when that happens. But he's 26 of 35 with 9.8 yards per attempt when he's kept clean, which is very, very good. And he's been able to make plays, and like he seems to be getting more comfortable as we go on, which you would expect from a rookie quarterback. So I think his pressure numbers probably are going to get better as we keep going. So, I'm excited about that. I'm really excited about Nico Collins because I think you are with me on this guy being okay. He's their number one. We think the passing game is going to be a little bit better. And through 2 weeks, he has absolutely delivered. He's 10th with 11.3 yards per target among wide receivers, 12th among players with 20 or more routes at 2.94 yards per route run. He's got a relatively deep average depth of target, but he's been efficient on it. He's surprisingly, I think, not running as many routes as Robert Woods and Tank Dell, at least last week. But yeah, he looks like the number one receiver, and I'm riding Nico Collins. I feel very comfortable with him in my fantasy lineups moving forward.
Yeah, especially with the play volume. I mean, he's a guy that probably is going to have some more volatility than what he's shown through 2 weeks. I mean, he's 28th among all wide receivers in team target share. It's just that they're throwing so much. But the thing about him is he's unique compared to the other receivers in this offense because he runs routes downfield. And that was kind of one of the things paired with CJ Stroud because Nico Collins had one of the highest uncatchable target rates last season, and that's like where Stroud's bread and butter is. Like the vertical ball outside the number is where Stroud was excellent in college, and obviously there's been some symmetry through 2 weeks because although he's 28th in teams of team target share, he's wide receiver 13 in share of team air yards. So he makes up the ground for lack of targets and quality of targets, and that's what stands out. So I think he's going to end up being a little more volatile than what he's let on. But he looks like he's going to be like a solid like wide receiver 3 with upside like most weeks.
Yeah, and I think, I'm very excited, especially if you're in a league that maybe you went running back heavy and you're able to find that. If you're in a best ball, if you have your best ball, which I do in a lot, I'm very excited
Mm-hmm.
about kind of what we've seen from Nico Collins. And like I also think that if a receiver is scoring touchdowns, he is going to be the good bet to be doing it in Houston. So I'm really excited. All right, let's move on and talk about a few of the games coming up this week. I think the most interesting game from a fantasy perspective is the Chargers and Vikings in Minnesota. It's the one that you're looking at and going, okay, we at least have some excitement here. One of the things I'm really interested in paying attention to this week is deep shots from Kirk Cousins to Jordan Addison and to Justin Jefferson. They've been amazing throwing the ball deep so far this season. Cousins is 7th in EPA per drop back with an off target rate of 3.8% on 10 plus yard throws. Cousins is 4th in EPA per drop back with an off target rate of 0 on 10 20 plus yard throws. He sits 6 deep completions. That's tied for the league lead. They've been throwing it deep. They've been successful. The Chargers have not been. I think that this could be a game that features a lot of big plays and could really explode because of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Brian Flores isn't gonna through 2 weeks has shown he's not gonna let you do anything vertically downfield. Really, he did the long play to Devontae Smith, but like Brian Flores is back in his bag. They played 2 snaps of man coverage so far this year. He didn't even care. He was like DeAndre Swift run for 6 yards
Hold
per
on,
carry.
say that again. Say that again. They played 2 snaps of man coverage.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, they're not. I mean, this is a team like Brian Flores. He's gonna run a lot of zone blitzes, and he's gonna try to give not to give up big plays. Like that's like his mo, man. So it's gonna be interesting, and I wonder if Brandon Staley is gonna like try to do a similar thing. I mean, if he's gonna try to play more coverage and do the old Brandon Staley way of it, try to invite them to try to entice some Alexander Madison handoffs because he knows they're not efficient. It's gonna be interesting to watch this. That's the way this game lets down, right? Is if you have two coaches that just say like two defensive coaches that say like we are going to make teams throw either underneath or run the football. I think it's what makes Josh Kelly stand out in this game from a DFS perspective. Again, is that just because Brian Flores so far, it's like he wants you to run the football against him, and that's what he's done at every stop he's been at. Is he wants you to try to run the football. He's going to give you those light looks, play coverage over the top, and then he's going to run a lot of blitzes out of zone. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. If we don't have Austin Eckler, though, we did see the change, right? It's amazing when your running back can't play that commands a lot of targets. Now the A-dot starts to climb, huh? Yeah. Because Josh Kelly doesn't command targets in the pass game like Austin Eckler does. And it was just the third time in Herbert's career he hasn't targeted running backs at least 10% or more of the time. And he had his third highest depth of target in his career. That's how that goes. The one thing I think that is interesting, though, is we are starting to see like some cards revealed on the wide receiver changes with Kellen Moore. We're seeing Mike Williams play more in the slot than he has ever in his career. And we're seeing Keenan Allen get a little bit of like that CeeDee Lamb route tree. He is the one guy. He is running more routes downfield than he has in his career. 16% of his routes run, not targets, his routes have been 20 or more yards downfield. Last year it was just 7.5%. So if this holds, it'll easily be the highest rate of his career. So he is getting more downfield shots. Remember, go back to week 1, his first catch of the season. He catches that 35-yard, pass down the sideline against the Dolphins. We're seeing him get more vertical shots than we have, which is fun for a 31-year-old wide receiver. We're seeing the opposite, like the inverse happen with DeAndre Hopkins, right? Like his targets just keep shrinking. They just keep coming closer and closer to the line of scrimmage. But yeah, this is a game where you look at it from a top-down stance and you're like, you've got the Chargers, you got the Vikings. They're almost the Spider-Man meme in a sense because they only play weird games. But does a triple stamp like outweigh the double stamp, and do they negate each other here? We'll see what happens.
I'm actually going to push back a little bit on Staley because they got destroyed down the field in week 1, and then the Titans of all teams, Ryan Tannehill of all teams, was able to create deep plays. They gave up 2 20-yard completions to
Because
Ryan
he
Tannehill.
tried to
I
stop
didn't
the
know.
run more than he tried to prevent stopping the run. That's why their run stats look better this year than they have than under Brandon Staley in the past. Because they committed more to the Titans run game, and it didn't matter.
I think it has a lot more to do with that secondary and just breakdowns. And we've seen that happen before, and we've seen the Vikings create those through 2 weeks here. So I'm in on it. I know Ryan McChrystal's in on Kirk Cousins over longest prop. I'm in on Jordan Addison over longest prop. I do think that the Vikings are going to be able to create big plays in the passing game in this one. I will say that your point about Flores, I did not know the two man coverage snaps is wild. That is absolutely wild through 2 games. I do think your point about the Chargers is right. Although, as you say, with Austin Eckler, if Austin Eckler isn't there, then that kind of forces them to play a little bit different. And we did see that target depth improve. But I am like Josh Kelly is. This is a great spot to go back to Josh Kelly in DFS after last week with the Titans, who we know you shouldn't play running backs against the Titans. And you brought up all the reasons why. I mean, he had 13 of 18 running back carries last week. The Vikings are giving up 4.8 yards per carry to running backs. It's the 7th worst. They were better against the Bucks in week 1, but I mean, it's the Bucks. They can't run the football. So you're not worried about that. So I'm with you on Josh Kelly. What about Mike Williams? Mike Williams has had an interesting season. You talked about a little about Keenan Allen. He's been targeted on 26.5% of his routes so far. That would be well over his career average. I know you've written about they're using him in the slot more. Is that just heavily inflated from last week in a matchup we liked from him, or or do we think he's going to start getting used more moving forward? Obviously, last week without Austin Eckler as well. So do we think he's going to keep getting used kind of in this way moving forward? Or are we going to go back to the 19% target rate per route kind of Mike Williams that we expect?
Well, I mean, obviously Eckler being out and just how many targets Eckler commands was a nice boost for him. We like how he's being used to start the year because Mike was always a guy that was if you're playing a man coverage based team, you're going to look for him to get those plays because he has really wild cattywampus splits versus man versus zone coverage, and when Justin Herbert was willing to let him win. So just putting him in the slot more gives him more like efficiency smoothing opportunities, and that's what we've had. But also what helps him is that none of these other guys are stepping up. Like we know what we have in Josh Palmer, right? Like Josh Palmer's not a target earner unless he's the only guy left like last year. And they have yet to incorporate Quentin Johnston into the offense, and the tight ends aren't target earners either. So when you remove Austin Eckler, it just gives Mike Williams a larger run out. But you have to be encouraged by the usage so far, how he's being used, because it should just give him a little more stability with the types of targets he was getting, and just not relying on him to win downfield and in one-on-one situations. Give him a little more targets in the intermediate area.
Yeah, and that just smooths it out. It makes him more reliable. And so I think that could be something we see. But again, we'll just have to see when Eckler comes back. Well, I hope when Eckler comes back. Did you hear kind of there's no timetable? Did you see that quote from Staley
I
this
kind of
week?
was reading it that was he wasn't. I took it as, well, we're at least getting one more week of Josh Kelly.
Yeah, I don't know. That wasn't positive. To your point though, Quentin Johnson, his route participation, so running a route on Chargers dropbacks, he's only run one on 20.5%. And by the way, that was with Mike Williams missing time in week 1 as well. Gerald Everett 42.9%, Donald Parham 41.7%. Like they're just nobody else is really stepping up and taking a big role. Josh Palmer's not drawing, any targets whatsoever. And so, there's been a lot here for Williams. There's a lot of good things for Williams here moving forward, and hopefully, kind of we see this usage continue. All right, let's move on to talk about the Chiefs Bears. I guess this wouldn't normally be a game that we'd be interested in talking about. The Chiefs are 12.5-point home favorites, but I read the worksheet this week. By the way, the worksheet over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can get it with our all access package, with our fantasy package. You can get either one of those packages for 15% off with the promo code ANGLES over at Sharp Football Analysis. I was reading your worksheet for Chiefs and Bears, and you had a ton to write about Justin Fields and a ton of interesting things to write about Justin Fields. And then yesterday, on Wednesday, we record this on a Thursday, he comes out and kind of calls out the coaching a little bit and then walks it back later. This is an interesting situation here for Justin Fields.
Yeah, you look at Justin Fields. I mean, another guy we keep kicking the can on, right? Like, when is he going to show us the growth as a passer, right? And he can even make his own excuses, right? Of the coaching staff is trying to get him to process things, and that's really been his problem in the NFL, is processing, right? That's been like the one holdback for him, is he takes a ton of sacks because he just doesn't process quick enough. More than any quarterback that's entered the NFL since he has. He's not good in the quick game. And when you put that all together with like the talent he's had to this point, the offensive lines he's had, it's been a recipe for disaster. And then you factor in the other side of the ball too. The Bears defense is once again absolutely trash.
Just
so
bad.
But we've seen defenses kind of calibrate too, at least through 2 weeks, that they want Justin Fields to have to read the field, right? Like they're not blitzing him. And granted, you can get pressure on him without blitzing. That's a combination of this offensive line and him holding the football through this. But we've now seen it. So the Packers, they blitz Justin Fields 31% of the time in week 1. But then in week 2, they come back and they blitz Desmond Ridder 45% of the time. The Buccaneers in week 1, not facing Justin Fields, Todd Bowles was doing his thing. He blitzed 43% of the time. And then last week against Justin Fields, they toned it down and they only blitzed 27.8% of the time. And I was looking at a lot of the career splits for Justin Fields, and it's like, it's all tried and true. Like when he is not blitzed and teams play zone coverage, he's been literally the worst quarterback in the NFL since he entered the league. Going back to last year, he has 3 passing touchdowns on almost 300 dropbacks when teams don't blitz and play zone coverage. Absolutely heinous. But he's been good, like when teams speed it up and they make him play football, which is what he kind of was talking about. Like
Yep.
not trying to play like a robot, I believe was the phrase he used. When teams have blitzed him this year, he's 13 of 19, 10.3 yards per pass attempt, and he's got a touchdown in that situation. And then when he's not blitzed, 57% completion rate, 4.9 yards per pass attempt. The only quarterback worse when not blitzed is Zach Wilson so far. The other thing too is that they're not doing any designed running with him at
It's
all. Like
wild.
he has 5 designed rushing carries through 2 games. Last year he averaged over 6 per game, and it's like you remove that from the offense, you're just helping the defense, right? So I mean, it's this weird thing. I don't think the coaching staff's doing him any favors either, but like eventually the onus does fall on, like, we're 30 starts into Justin Fields' career and we've yet to see like positive growth. You brought up CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud already has more 300-yard passing games in 2 starts than Justin Fields does at this point in his career. So I mean, we do need Justin Fields need to show, and this is kind of a make or break year for him, right? Like they gave him the weapons. Like he's got DJ Moore. They don't have to sign him to a huge contract. This regime didn't draft him. So this is kind of like an all-in season for him to kind of either, do it or get off the pot.
Yeah, and I mean, especially if they're going to continue to, be bad kind of moving forward, then they're going to be in a position to draft quarterbacks. This is going to be, at least from what we can tell, this is going to be a good quarterback class. I believe they have somebody else's first round picks. Yeah, they have the Panthers first round
Yeah,
pick.
Panthers.
The Panthers have also been bad. And so like it's yeah, they're this is make or break, I think, for sure for Justin Fields. You mentioned the design rushes. I just have to say that's 6 fewer. He has 5 design runs. That's 6 fewer than Daniel Jones, at 10 fewer than Jalen Hurts. Like, why? What are we doing? The other thing I'll say though about the offensive line gets a lot of blame. I think that this has a lot more to do with Justin Fields and the offensive line. If you just take a look at ESPN's pass block win rate, which they're trying to isolate the offensive line in that regard, which you can't really do with pressure rate, then they are 11th in pass block win rate this year. They were fine in that metric last year as well, the offensive line. So I think that the offensive line is catching way too many strays when we talk about this pressure rate. This has a lot more to do with Justin Fields
Yeah,
and the
take
way that he
sacks are a
plays
quarterback
football.
stat. Like
Yep.
pressures can be an offensive line stat, but taking sacks is a quarterback stat. And you literally have the 2 quarterbacks you have the one that's the worst at turning pressures into sacks, and you have the quarterback who, since he entered the league, is the best at avoiding sacks and pressures in Patrick Mahomes. So you couldn't have 2 more different guys.
Yeah, and so I think that this is really on Fields, but I also think that just let him go. Like let him play how he was in the middle of last year and kind of see what happens. The problem Fields also is going to have this week is that the Chiefs defense is quietly good. It was kind of good at the end of last year as well. They've played the Lions, they played the Jaguars, they played the Lions without Chris Jones. I think we expect both of those offenses to be good, and they've pretty much shut them down. The Chiefs currently ranked 10th in yards per play allowed, 7th in yards per pass attempt, 12th in yards before contact per carry. Just 14.9% of the plays against them have gained 10 or more yards, which is 4th. I think that their secondary on a per play pass basis last year was maybe better than the overall numbers looked, and they've been pretty good again this year. This Chiefs defense I just think is good, and they're coming in 1-1. They're probably going to be 2-1 leaving this game with their offense sputtering, and their offense is going to get better, and their defense is playing like this. I mean, this looks like just another juggernaut out of Kansas City. It's going to be interesting to see if this is a team that we're more even avoiding, not even just that it's a neutral matchup, but we're avoiding this Chiefs defense moving forward.
Yeah, me and Dan Pizzuta like talked about this at the end of last year when they got healthy, because they had multiple guys in the back end miss time last year, but their pass defense was really good when everyone was on the field. When L'Jarius Sneed was on the field, when McDuffie was on the field, they were really strong. And we know that they can, rush the passer when you have a guy like Chris Jones. And it flew under the radar because the Chiefs, historically it's been like they got this great offense. You can attack them for fantasy production because you're getting so many dropbacks and you're getting so many opportunities, and the defense isn't good. But You pair that with, Steve Spagnuolo, who it's like some guys are just made to be defensive coordinators, right? Like, you look at like where Dan Quinn has found a home. Like some guys aren't meant to be head coaches; they're meant to be defensive coordinators. I think Spags is clearly one of those guys. And when he has talent, his defenses have really performed. And we're seeing, like I said, like that a little bit with Dan Quinn as well. So yeah, I mean, the Chiefs are a team like, yeah, I think their defense is definitely very good, especially when you think about the two offenses they faced to start the season. Their offenses that are teams that we believe have good offenses from a top-down stance, and they're teams that have played a lot better offense in their games not facing the Chiefs.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, get a comment here in the chat. You can come and join us live on Thursday mornings, 11:30 Eastern on YouTube. From Sue Ann, who said that it's not just that Justin Fields is blameless, that you can't deny that the coaching play calling is not oriented around his strength. I think that's fair. I think the real takeaway here is that there's a lot of blame to go around, right? Like that's things are bad. And when things are this bad, then there are lots of people that can take blame. So I definitely
Yeah,
think
yeah. But
I
I do
definitely
think
think
like the Deshaun Watson stuff, like the Alexander Madison stuff, like eventually, like the player has to give you something.
yeah, I think that that's fair as well. One last thing here, Isaiah Pacheco. I want to kind of talk about this in passing because he did not practice on Wednesday. We haven't seen Thursday yet. If he is ready to go, though, if he is playing, I mean, this is a smash spot for Pacheco, right?
I mean, you look at his role, 10-point home favorite, bad defense. Like this would be, if you can't get excited about him here, you really can't get excited about him in any environment, right? It's like things we talked about with like, Rashad White or, Brian Robinson in week 1, although he played really good in week 2. But like, this is like the spot you want to circle a guy that doesn't catch a lot of passes, is attached to a high team total against, a bad opponent. So you definitely want to get him in. Hopefully we don't see the ghost of Clyde Edwards-Helaire again. I'm not ready to do that. It's been a tough start for running backs, and it's not like wide receivers haven't gotten hurt either, but even just ranking the running backs this week, I was in some names where I'm like, does this guy have to be here? And just like by process of elimination, like guys I'm not even high on are like ranked near like RB1 range.
Yeah, it was you were like live slacking, you trying to rank the running backs this week, and I could feel the despair through the computer screen.
But that's
Like
why
it
I do the
was
worksheet first before I do rankings, and I always get some pushback on that. It's because I want to look at it through the lens of like an expectation, right? Here's the
yeah.
environment. This is what I'm expecting. Because when you rank players, like you have to slot them in a certain order by default. There's only so many left. But just because I have to rank Josh Jacobs as RB8 or whatever doesn't mean my expectations are still he'll perform as the RB8.
Yeah, like we're still not excited about him gaining, was it -2 yards on 9 carries last week? Is that what he did? That
Yes.
wasn't exciting.
And you
If you
have to
want to
be
hear
concerned about the Josh Jacobs that we didn't include it in real or fake, but the two opponents that Josh Jacobs has faced, their non-Raiders games, they've gotten smoked on the ground.
that that also feels like an offensive line issue. They're not really creating for him. And
Oh, yeah,
again,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
really
yeah.
hard. It's really hard in this when you're talking about pressure rate and we're talking about yards per carry. It's really hard, or yards before contact per carry, I should say. It's really hard to kind of weigh out, is this quarterback, is this offensive line, is this running back, is this offensive line? That one to me, just watching it, feels more like an offensive line issue.
Yeah, I
And
would
so it's
agree.
going to be interesting to see if they're able to improve that. By the way, this thought is brought to you by ADHD and looking at it late at night. Do we pronounce Pacheco's first name correctly? Because I think everybody calls him Isaiah, but the way he spells it, isn't it? Uh, isn't it Isaiah? Isn't Isaiah the way that you would say that name? The way that he spells it. Has anybody asked him if we're all pronouncing his name wrong?
Yeah, someone's got to ask. I mean, I've always noticed the spelling, obviously, because I had to add it to my dictionary
Yeah,
that I'm not
exactly.
spelling it wrong. But yeah, someone should ask him. Hopefully, it's not an Arthur Juwan situation where we had his middle name wrong for years and he finally corrected us.
Yeah. No, I might I
Who
might
else?
tweet at
Someone did
Pacheco.
that. Someone else did that recently, where corrected the pronunciation of their name. I
Oh, I
swear it was
can't
just like
remember.
last year. I swear it just happened where someone was like, "No, you guys have had it wrong."
We are getting a lot of name changes, though. I've been a fan of the name changes for sure. All right, let's finish up here with the Eagles and Bucks. Really, I just wanted to talk about the Eagles and Bucks because you seem to be like all in on Chris Godwin this week. So I'm interested in
Ah,
hearing why.
Yeah, I do like Chris Godwin. I'm waiting for some player props to be released on Chris Godwin. He's played backseat to Mike Evans the opening 2 games, but I mean it's a thin target tree in Tampa Bay. Like they still don't have a wide receiver 3 playing regular snaps at all. Kate Otten is third on the team in route participation and like by a wide margin over the next closest guy in Trey Palmer. So thin target tree. And then this matchup, I think, is a great spot for it to kind of oscillate back towards being like a Godwin game when the first 2 games have been Mike Evans games. Because you're going to get James Bradbury back. You already have Darius Slay on the field, solid players on the outside for the Eagles. But where the Eagles have really struggled to open this year is on the interior in the middle of the field. Obviously they lose both safeties in free agency. They will have Reed Blankenship back this week. They lose Nakobe Dean to start the season. He's still going to be out this week. And then you lose Avonte Maddox on Thursday night. And going back to last year, Avonte Maddox, when he was in and out of the lineup, because remember, you've got 2 good corners. We see this with the Jets a little bit, not to the degree, but when you're that good on the outside, and we saw this with Seattle last year too, when you're that good on the outside, you force throws to the middle of the field. But the Eagles had a really good nickelback in Avonte Maddox. When Avonte Maddox was in the games going back to last year, to slot wide receivers, they allowed a 62.7% completion rate, 6.4 yards per target, 0 touchdowns on 51 targets to slot wide receivers. With Avonte Maddox sidelined, because he did miss 4 games last year, 71.8% completion rate to slot receivers, 9.1 yards per target, 8 touchdowns on 78 targets. When he left the game last Thursday, Minnesota slot receivers immediately caught all 5 of their targets with a touchdown. So I do think this is a signal for Chris Godwin stuff. He is playing outside more in his career because they're not running as much 3 wide receiver stuff. But all the over the middle field stuff is still his when they do go 3 wide receivers. That's when he goes inside and plays the slot. So I do think it's going to be a Godwin over Evans game when it's been more of an Evans game. And then we have the factor that the Eagles are playing. They're getting what we wanted from like a volume stance. They're running opponents are running just a ton of plays against the Eagles. It's just that Jalen Hurts hasn't been as efficient as a passer through 2 weeks that we had as last year. But opponents now are running a ton of plays for them. So the Eagles might be a team we target for play volume and quarterback dropbacks, like we were talking about, like with the Strouds of the world.
And I mean, I think it's important to like that you brought up last year too. Like this was a split. This Maddox split was something that I played successfully in DFS last year. I'm pretty sure you did. I didn't know for sure, but I'm guessing you did as well. And so, yeah, this is something to pay attention to, especially if you're playing the short Monday slate and we have 2 games again, so you can play that short classic slate, or if you're even just playing showdown, it's going to be interesting for that. And the other thing you have to mention is that Baker Mayfield is kind of playing fine. You're not scared of either matchup that he's played. He's played the Vikings and he's played the Bears, but he's 7th in EPA per dropback. He's 11th in completion rate over expected. And I have to say, this is the one quarterback that was worse than the Jets trio of quarterbacks last year. That's how bad he was last year. And it's not happening now. We'll see, we'll see kind of where we go from here. But he does have a lot more talent on the outside than he had at any point last year. He had DJ Moore in Carolina, but he didn't have Cooper Kupp with the Rams. And so, we'll see. We'll see this week. We'll learn a little bit more about Baker this week. The other part about this game that you really have to think about is the Eagles' backfield.
Mm-hmm.
We saw Gainwell started be the clear lead back in week 1, wasn't able to play in week 2. Swift comes in, runs all over the Vikings. And at this point, I mean, do you have any idea kind of what this split is going to be, or is it just kind of like hands in the air heading into this week?
I mean, I know what I think it should be, but that doesn't mean
yes.
I believe the Eagles believe that. Obviously,
I know what we're wish casting. We're not forecasting Swift, maybe, but we are definitely wish casting that we're going to see a lot more DeAndre.
So yeah, it's going from it from that stance. I mean, all the signals they gave us through the offseason was they believed in Kenneth Gainwell. And week 1, they showed they believed in Kenneth Gainwell. And then DeAndre Swift played because their hand was forced the degree he did. Now, I've long believed, like a lot of people, that DeAndre Swift is the most talented of those running backs. I think that he fits the scheme really well. And he proved that in week 2. We now have 169 carries for Kenneth Gainwell in his career, and he's got 120-yard run. Like DeAndre Swift did that in 1 game last week. So I'm still at least going with some pause of trepidation that the Eagles still might want Kenneth Gainwell to be a thing. And there might be more of a split here than we're assumed. We probably missed the best DeAndre Swift games. We didn't play him last week. you probably did not get the best game you'll have all season. But the best part of that game was watching the frustration, not just from fantasy gamers, but DeAndre Swift himself. On both times he was tackled on the 1 yard line, he knew immediately what was happening. His frustration that second time when he got tackled on the 1, because he knew he was not getting that carry after that.
Yeah.
It was fun to watch him because he knew the tush push was coming. And seeing that, because he should have had 3 touchdowns. He just missed out on 3 of them.
To be fair to the Eagles, that is the way that is the play you would run at the 1 yard line every
Absolutely.
single time as well. Every single time you would run that play until they make it.
His disinterest on pushing Justin Fields on the second one was pretty good. You could just see like the disdain of him getting tackled on the 1, and was just like, damn it.
It's that Amon-Ra St. Brown from last year, just getting tackled at the 1 and knowing that Jamal Williams was going to come in.
They owed him that third one for sure, Sue-Ann. They owed him.
They definitely owed him. They definitely owed him that one. All right, let's move on to what's quickly becoming my favorite segment of our show, and that's because of the graphic that accompanies it. That is Uncut Gems, talking about it's gonna get me every time. Fantastic job, producer Heather. That is wonderful. Talking about maybe some players that are in advantageous spots that maybe you won't be thinking about as being maybe a top 20 player at their position this week. So who do you got this week, Rich?
Yeah, but my guy this week is Elijah Moore. We talked about, maybe not, going all in on Jerome Ford against this Titans matchup. The Browns probably being forced to pass. Whether we get efficiency via the passing game remains to be determined. We know we're obviously Amari Cooper's in a good spot, but Elijah Moore has run a pass route on 89% and 84% of the team dropbacks. He has 7 and 9 targets. As you highlighted, they've been inefficient targets through Deshaun Watson's play, but maybe the Titans defense is acquiesced and we get some production. They have allowed double-digit PPR points to 5 different wide receivers so far. We've only played 2 games. They have allowed 16.5 or more PPR points to 4 of those wide receivers. So I think if you had Elijah Moore on your bench as like a fringe guy and like you're down a spot this week, or you've got kind of a weird, like a hole in your lineup in a flex spot, I think this is a week to take a shot at him.
Yeah, I mean, Titans pass funnel goes back to last year. This is what it is. You playing pass catchers against the Titans, and you are avoiding running backs against the Titans. That's just the way it is moving forward. Mine is actually Josh Reynolds, who it's been interesting to kind of watch his usage over the first 2 weeks. He's been a clear number 2 receiver. He actually led the team in routes last week because we saw Amon-Ra St. Brown miss some time with 2 injuries, actually. One of them that he's still dealing with now with his toe injury. There's a 22% target rate on his routes. He's averaging 11.7 air yards per target. He has 30.5% of the team air yards. That's actually higher than St. Brown. He is the only end zone target they've had this year. He is the number 2 wide receiver in a passing game that we expect to be good. Now, what I will say is the Falcons have been good against wide receivers so far this year. They might even be getting Jeff Okudah back this week. I think they lead the league with 5.5 yards per attempt targeting wide receivers, but they've played the Panthers and they've played the Packers without Christian Watson. So I need to see that this is real from the Falcons. I did expect their defense to be better. They made additions. They're actually spending money on defense this year, but I don't think that it's, best in the league against wide receivers either. And so we're going to see some comeback off of that. And so I'm very interested in Josh Reynolds this week, both in DFS and if you need somebody in maybe a deeper league to fill in a flex spot. All right, that's almost it for us. Any closing thoughts? Anything you're looking for to in week 3? Anything we should be paying attention to?
No, I think just more cards to be revealed. Like you've talked about, we're still small sample. Some of these teams have been opponent driven to start, so we're trying to figure out some things like what's real and kind of like what's fake still for the league is in general. Obviously, I still want to see like what really is Jordan Love at this point. Like he keeps getting there. He's starting to turn into the Aaron Paul meme for me a little bit, but he's also getting Christian Watson back. So like, is that like a big plus? What will we see? Puka Nacua to continue to get 20 targets a game, those types of things. But that's kind of, and the Jaguars offense still too. Like this has the makings of like a should get right spot for the Jaguars. Let's see if they actually do get right.
So do you think that Jordan Love's 11.5% touchdown rate, you don't think that that's going to persist for the entire season?
I thought that going from week 1 to week 2, and he said Stick it to me. Stick it to you, Rich. Right in your face.
So he has 11. He's 11.5% touchdown rate and a 55.8% completion rate. Those two things seem congruous. Definitely, like those two things seem
But
like they'll
also,
be
we
able
got
to
Chris
continue.
Watson bags, Ray. We've got Christian Watson bags, and we need them to work out.
You and me need Jordan Love. We need Christian Watson back, and we need Jordan Love, and we need Jordan Love to show up for sure. I'm actually looking at more of an overall thing than a fantasy thing. I'm very fascinated by the Bucks and Commanders this week. Both have had surprising starts. Neither have had particularly impressive wins, although I will say maybe that win against the Vikings in week one is more impressive than anything the Commanders have done. Both have quarterbacks playing better than we expected. Sam Howell in the second half against Broncos last week was legitimately good. And as I've said about Sam Howell before, there was a time in his college career where we thought he was a first round prospect. There is talent right there. And so I think that, you know, it'll be interesting to see what he does, but
I
they
had
also have
Howell
elite
over
teams coming
Pickett,
to town.
man. Out of that draft, I had Howell over Pickett. Took a bunch of heat, especially when the draft capital came out too.
Yeah.
But I'm still gonna hanging on to what I've seen through 2 weeks. That Sam Howell still is better than Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, no, he might be. But what I'll say is two elite teams coming to town this week. We'll find out. We'll find out about the Commanders and the Bucks this week. That's it for us. Rich, you can find him on Twitter at Lord Reeves. You can find his worksheets at sharpfootballanalysis.com. It's the best way to get ready for a fantasy football week. As I'm reading them, as I'm going through them every week, I'm just copying, pasting things into a Google Doc. I think that Google Doc is like 10 pages long. At this point, it's not even notes. At this point, it's just an essay. And so there's so much in those worksheets. Go and check them out. Check out Sharp Football Analysis. If you're listening to this on a podcast, go and subscribe to our YouTube page, Shirts Worn Sharp on YouTube, and you can find us there. We will be back next week, and we'll see you then.